I'm currently 15, but my first encounter with paranormal was when I was 5. I lived alone with my single mother at the time. Being poor family, our home only had one bedroom and one floor. So my mother and I had to sleep on the same bed. It was the night leading to my 6th birthday, and as every child, I was very excited to finally turn 6. But what I'm about to tell you ruined my birthday, leading up to the present time. I still remember this event vividly. It was the middle of the night. I had woken up suddenly. This was common for me, as I was very light sleeper. I remember looking to my left and seeing my mother sleeping deeply. As I watched her more intently, I saw that her facial expression were different. It was definitely noticeable, even in the slightly moonlit room. I vividly remember her shaking, ever so slightly. Not shaking as if she was cold, but like something was shaking from the inside. Now keep in mind, the sleep paralysis only occur after 14, so that is out of the picture. To my surprise, I saw a dark black figure rise out of her unconscious body. It rose out of the bed and walked out of the room. Me, being a socially awkward and shy child, I decided to follow the black mass of the body. At that age, I thought it was my mother getting out of the bed. I followed the figure through the living room to the kitchen and eventually the front door. I repeatedly called out, "Mom," but each time the figure ignored me. The figure continued walking down the steps, now outside our house. Being 5-year-old, I was confused. Why would my mother leave the house this late at night? This was when I started to get a little scared. Confused and tired, I continued to follow the figure down the steps. I was barefooted, and I remember the pain of little pebbles pressing into my feet as I desperately tried to get the figure's attention. What happened next? What happened next keeps me up at night, even now. The figure turned around, and in the dim light of the light pole, I could only make out one feature of this large black mass. Bright glowing yellow eyes had filled my vision. Without thinking, I had been so scared and confused that I stumbled to the ground. I remember closing my eyes, hoping it was just a nightmare. Now, you're probably thinking that it was just a nightmare, but I can honestly tell you, this has ruined my childhood. The next day, probably around 2 or 3 in the morning, all I remember is waking up to the side of the road, crying, wishing that my mother was okay. To my absolute surprise, my mother had come out of the front door and ran to me to comfort me. To this day, paranormal activity had been occurring more and more often, like lights being turned on in the house, sounds coming from the house, and outside the front door. It seems to get more and more noticeable as well. I still have nightmare about this incident. I hope that whoever or whatever that black mass was never come back. A few months ago, I had some new neighbors moved into next door to me. They were, to put it in the nicest way I can, extremely noisy. And with me working from home at the time, the constant noise proved to be daily nuisance. It was either their small children screaming late at night or one of their dogs barking in the back garden. The poor dogs were kept in cage for most of the day, so I can't blame them. Anyway, as frustrating as I found my new neighbors and their lack of regard for others, I'm not one for confrontation. So I just had to get used to the noise. This went on for a couple of months, but then few weeks back, I heard an argument outside. For background, my neighbors were a young couple with 2 small children. I never spoke to them, apart from greeting odd hellos or afternoon in the passing. The man that lived next door had white van that he must have used for work, and he currently stood in front of it arguing with an old gentleman. I could hear them arguing about money at the end of the driveway. I peeked out of my living room to look at the other guy, but he soon walked away, clearly not wanting to engage with my neighbors any further. My neighbors then walked back inside his home, slamming the front door behind him. I muttered to myself that he seemed to pride himself on being noisy as possible, then pushed the thought to back of my mind as I had to work. A few days passed and I began to notice that the white van that were usually a constant present at the front of their house was nowhere to seen. I also began to notice that I no longer hear the daily barking of their dogs or the late night crying of their children. I was quite gleeful at this point, thanking the heavens for the respite from the noise. I just assumed maybe they've gone away for holidays or something. Then it wouldn't be long before the noise started to back up again. But only the noise didn't start up again. There was no sign of life at all. Yet all the windows of the front of the house remained open for days. It was eerie how quiet the house had become. I started to think that maybe the disagreement outside had been with the landlord and they had up and left. At the time I was working completely from home and I hadn't seen their van return at any point, or even caught sight of removal of van to indicate they had moved out. They had simply vanished. Only as time went on, I started to hear strange noises coming from their house. I live in a semi-detached property, so my house is directly connected to there. And being an older building, the walls between our houses aren't very thick. I was laying in bed one night, trying to get some sleep, when I started to hear this strange scratching sound coming from inside my wardrobe. My wardrobe is one of those fitted style. It sat against the wall that connected my house with the neighbors. So actually, back of the wardrobe was simply the wall of the room. I continued laying there, listening for noise. It came again, and I started to panic, thinking maybe there was a mouse inside my wardrobe. I sat up in bed and turned on the lamp on my bedside table. I walked towards the wardrobe and pulled the door open, heart pounding, as I really hate things that crawl around the house. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and light inside the wardrobe. I checked every corner to find nothing. I almost had a sign of relief, only to hear it again. I jumped back from the door, nearly dropping my phone in fright. I frantically directed my light back on the open space of wardrobe. I could hear my heart thumping frantically in my ears. It was coming from the wall, and the sound was getting louder. It sounded like something was clawing at the wall. I had to hold back my scream, clamping a hand over my mouth. What the heck was making that noise? It was now far too loud to simply be a mouse. I started to panic, wondering what the heck was going next door, when all of a sudden the noise stopped. I stood there for a solid 2 minutes, holding my breath in anticipation of hearing it again, but the sound was gone. I slept downstairs the night, too terrified to wake up to that awful scratching noise. As the days passed, I continued to hear strange noises coming from the next door. The noises seemed to move around the house, and it was often difficult to figure out where they were coming from. Thankfully, I didn't hear the scratching noise again, only the thumping and shifting of some objects, which of course was still super creepy. I started to think that maybe the neighbors were coming back to their house, maybe just to remove their belongings, but I had yet to catch sight of them, and there had been no further noises from their children or dog. You could see into their garden if you looked outside my bedroom window on the back of my house. Strangely, the cages that kept their dogs in still remained in the garden. I mentioned this as one day, when I sat working, I started to hear this odd creaking noise coming from the back of the house. If I kept the windows of the house open, you could often hear the dogs shifting in their cages, and the movement of the course would cause the cage to shift and creak. Perhaps the owner even left their cage door open sometimes, adding to the noise. I sat there and listened closely. I could hear what sounded like dogs shuffling in the cages. I rushed upstairs and checked out the bedroom window. The cages were still empty. I felt a chill run up in my spine. This was just another occurrence on a long list of strange noises I continued to hear over a period of several weeks. The worst one happened few days ago, and this time I actually saw something. I just had returned from supermarket. I was carrying my bags into the house when I noticed the front door of the neighbor's house was slightly ajar. I stayed at the door for a few moments, expecting to see one of the neighbors appear, but the house remained quiet and I saw no one. Dismissing as it was just another strange occurrence, I went back to carry my food shopping into the house. As I dropped my last bag into the kitchen and went back to lock my front door, my curiosity got better of me. I hurried back out of the front of my house, walked away in my driveway, took a right, and started walking up the path of neighbor's front door. In the few moments it had taken me to carry my bags inside, the door of the neighbor's house had creaked open further. I could now just about to see inside. Only what I saw was downright creepy. The door was about halfway open now, so I could see their front hallway. Children's shoes and toys were littered on ground just to the left of the door. A light was also on, what I presumed was in the kitchen at the end of the hallway. "Hello?" I called. Nothing, no response. I tried again, waited a few moments, but there was no response. I pushed the front door further. As I did, a cold breeze rushed past me, and I jumped back in fright. At the same time, I saw the door to the kitchen swung open, and I swear I could see a dark figure stood in open doorway. You better believe I noped out. It was only when I came back in my house, behind the locked door, I was able to calm down. I slumped down on the floor, trying to catch my breath, as a thought spun through my mind in a flurry of total chaos. Something you should know about me. As much as I love spooky stories, I'm terrified of paranormal events happening in my own house. As I sat there trying to calm down, I heard three distant knocks against the front door, not daring to move an inch. A few minutes later, then another. When no further knocks could be heard, I dared to unlock the door and peek outside. And of course, there was no one. To this day, I still don't know what happened to my neighbors. No one on my street does. They just seemed to have up and disappeared one day. These experiences started 10 years ago when I was playing with my RC truck in the backyard and saw a white blob which looked like a white ink blob in the corner of my eye. And when I turned to look at it, it darted off and I didn't think much of it and continued to play with my RC truck. From then on, I would see pure white or solid black figure darted at the corner of my vision or across my vision on few occasions. Recently, these experiences have started to involve physical objects such as 10 months ago when I was home alone watching TV while my dad and sister were out of town. I thought I heard something in the kitchen. So I paused the TV and when I got up, I heard a cupboard door open and slam in a force to knock a lot of stuff over in the cupboard and open the door next to. After that, I got into my car. A few weeks later, I was working on my RC plane and was linking it to my radio when I noticed the antenna which can pivot 90 degrees back and forth. At the moment, I was 5 feet away, and to move the antenna takes more force than any wind or AC can produce. After that, I only saw the figure few more times before my sister had her encounter, which sounded like a horror movie. Me and my dad were out of town, and my sister was home alone taking shower and left the bathroom door open since no one was home. She told me she heard the door shut, so she called out to open it. And this happened few more times before it slammed shut and locks. When she was telling me this, I have felt the worst fear I have felt. She continues to tell me that she jumped out, tried to unlock it, like something was holding the lock shut, preventing it from unlocking before unlocking it flying open. My sister then got dressed and left for the night and didn't get back to the house till me and my dad got back home.